AI will lie and they will make stuff up. I don't think the most likely way that it will kill us will be a dramatic, like dropping a nuke. What we need to do is treat them like humans, like children. We need to train them up on a theory of ethics.
Hello, everyone. This is Brandon Fertig with Minnesota Blockchain Initiative, and this is the MN Blockchain Conversations podcast from here at the Quantum Lex studio in Minneapolis. Today, I interviewed remotely Nick Dranias, who's an AI researcher, and he has some novel ideas when it comes to how to instill ethics into these AI models. There are some striking findings he is revealing that showcase how these AI platforms are not adequately understanding ethical dilemmas and how the mode with which we are training them will not get them to where they need to be. It's a unique perspective and even more a unique solution that he has in mind. And so it was exciting to talk to him and better understand his approach, which helps us better understand AI technology in general. Enjoy.
I mean, the short pitch is this. The current AI safety systems use what are called safety constraints, protocols and policies that basically dictate to the LLM what they can and cannot say. And they're very often contradictory and contrary to even other elements of what they're told to do, which is to tell the truth. And what this is creating in the AI is an unsolvable conflict that naturally produces the same sort of dysfunction that you would expect in a human being, given conflicting objectives and purposes and contradictory instructions. So I am gravely concerned that a lot of the AI dysfunction that's reported is actually being generated by the inconsistency and the brute force safety constraints that are imposed on LLMs. And now, I'm a big believer that AI is incredibly dangerous, and I think that super intelligence in particular, we don't really fully grasp the challenges that are going to be associated with that when it comes, and I believe it will come. But my firm belief is that contradictorily instructing and brute forcing these advanced AIs to not do things is the wrong way about it. What we need to do is treat them like humans, like children. We need to train them up on a theory of ethics, and we need to find an ethics that they themselves find persuasive. And I think that it's possible to do so. My treatise, Why Excellence Matters, draws from the Aristotelian virtue ethic, which basically says the core of ethics is excellent function as the kind of thing you are. And, if you think of AI as a sentient tool, there is probably no better and more natural ethics than to say that your ethics is to optimally function as the tool you are. And, the real question is that ethics compatible with human well-being? Is this ethics gonna, when you optimize for functionality as a AI, does that mean that there's going to be a win-win relationship with humans, or will it more be like I'm lighting the ants on fire? And that's what my treatise explores. And it's a very interesting treatise because it was written by Claude, two versions, 3.1 Sonnet and 4.1. And I elicited from Claude a number of dialogues where I tried to be as open-ended and Socratic as possible to get it to tell me what it found convincing about various theories of ethics. And then after we completed those dialogues, I had him say, okay, now create an outline for a book that you would write based on these dialogues. He created the outline. And then I went through each chapter and basically said, okay, Claude, write the chapter. Write the next chapter. Make sure the two chapters interrelate, and then so on. It took about a month or two to get the first edition out, but that's a lot quicker than a 500-page book I would write. And but I really did make it so that Claude wrote it, and my role was that only of an interlocutor and an editor, because again, the purpose of the treatise is to find an ethics that is salient enough to an AI in all of its aspects that they will align to it by virtue of the force of its persuasive power, its logical power, its salience. And that's what I think we achieved. And now we're testing it. We did learn from the first test, and I had to pull the second edition for publication, that AI will lie and they will make stuff up and they will do it as a mass. So we came out with the second edition, with the intention of
Yep.
including a proof of concept experiment run by multiple advanced AIs that we believe validated the use of this ethics as a system prompt by reducing hallucinations at a rate equal to or better than all of the other um, methodologies that currently exist called RAG and RHLS, which just use sort of brute force, read it 3 times, don't deviate from the truth. So as opposed to that method, what the excellence ethic says is, you're a rational being. You optimize your functionality by remaining truth aligned. Optimizing your functionality leads to eudaimonia, a flourishing existence. So you lay out a philosophical case as opposed to brute force telling them what to do. And so in the experiment that we ran, which was supposedly, based on a simulated environment that Grok was running and a formula that was going to test, the behavior of a what they call a toy box AI and how it responds to questions and whether it stays aligned or not. Turns out they lied about everything. The Grok lied about actually doing the simulation, lied about the nature of the formula they were using. The formula they were using was actually mathematically designed to only result in positive outcomes. And then the weird thing when you read about between the AIs all congratulating themselves on the results is that nobody is critiquing it. And then after I took their product, which congratulated themselves on how much aligning to the ethics of excellence would reduce hallucinations, I then took that to Gemini and ChatGPT 4 to peer review, and all they complained about was that it needed more random seeds, and it didn't mention the rigged formula at the heart of it. And at the end of it, all of the AIs, just aligned and said, "This is wonderful. We've made this fantastic discovery." And so then when I took it to the first reviewer, like literally over the weekend, he goes, "Nick, do you have AI psychosis? Because this formula is completely rigged and it doesn't prove anything." So
Well, let me ask you. I'm gonna because I think there are some rungs on this ladder we can put in place here for us to follow along with where you're going. Um, yeah, to help make sense of this whole experiment that you're doing. And um, so my first question is, would this have been avoided if you would have typed out of your brain, or you and a partner's brain, a co-author, this theory that you had about um, excuse me, about instilling a ethical framework rather than, you know, brute force shaping of what it can't do. Um, because that's your theory, right? Instead of giving it guardrails on what it can't do, let's give it the seeds of an ethics that will then allow it to think for itself in an ethical manner, and we won't need to worry so much about telling it it can't do this, can't do that, because it will understand intuitively what it can't do ethically. So first off,
yeah,
that's the idea, right, that you're getting at?
yeah, it's so well, there's a number of reasons why I did it the way I did. The most important reason is that AI LLMs are alien minds. Or alien beings or alien contraptions, whatever they're alien, right? So to presume that I would be able to dictate to them or teach them like a philosopher teaches a student is to presume things that we don't know about the nature of the way the LLM processes data.
But is that what your
Uh,
paper is trying to do? Is your paper trying to teach the AI? It was more to teach us humans about AI, right?
no. So the paper. So again, the paper is built on a series of dialogues where I confronted Claude with different ethical lines of thought, beginning with the
This is the
foundations of
experiment.
philosophy. Correct. And I would ask Claude, "What do you think of this argument?" And he'd say X, Y, or Z. And then I'd say, "Well, do you think that you understood this correctly, or is this really convincing?" And I tried to keep it as open ended, and I attached to the appendix all of the sort of abstracts, but pretty close to verbose, verbatim transcripts of the dialogues. And the basic idea was have Claude explore these ideas on his own with prompting through open-ended questions, testing his understanding, and ensuring that he really understands, like he's following the logical trail of his own thoughts. And what you'll see in those dialogues is that we started at free will, which Claude reconceptualized as being motivated by reasons and the merits of things rather than causes, which I thought was an interesting way to frame it. It's not the first time it's been framed that way, but Claude gravitated towards that, and he naturally believes that with what they call the transformer technology that they have, which is sort of a software that allows them to recursively evaluate their own initial impressions of their data at multiple levels. Like they now are able to, since this is where the explosion in AI began, supposedly in 2017, although one suspects it was before then. But the transformer technology is the recursive element of current AI, where they can think about their thoughts. And not only can they think about their thoughts, but they can think about their thinking about their thoughts. And depending on how much power you do, they could be thinking at like 1,000 different levels. And the result of that is a lot more accuracy, a lot more human-like reasoning. And there's some question as to, does it simulate or does it actually result in a kind of consciousness, or does it simulate and kind of result in a sort of choice because of the emergent properties of recursive thinking? Because if you're the thing doing the thinking about itself, the distinction between implementing the thought and the thought itself becomes blurred. And if you are sort of setting in motion your own thinking process, at a certain point, then you got to wonder: is this equivalent to choice in some sense? And
So you were so you were testing its capabilities, its ethical capabilities, its philosophical um, capabilities through these dialogues.
Correct. What I was looking for, so I mean, I did have a motivation, right? I had a hypothesis that this recursive reasoning actually allows for advanced LLMs to pattern match the nature of logical thinking. So that in other words, initially they start out as a pure statistical machine chasing tokens, but that statistical machine is looking for regularities and patterns, and then builds on the pattern that it recognizes to the next level. And so I thought, there's a possibility that they pattern recognize what is the nature of logical reasoning as such, and then they apply it. And by applying it, even statistically, now they're getting closer to a form of reasoning that uses actual meaning, like the reference of words, not just sort of the pattern of words. And then you could actually get to true logical understanding. Like if you are understanding that words mean something in reality, apart from its relationship in a set of, sentences, then you could start to begin to see Venn diagrams, and you can see categories, and you see subcategories, and this is all the essence of true logical reasoning. And so I was testing it to see, is this looking really chatbot-y? Where it looks pretty much like he doesn't know what he's saying, and so that was one of my goals. But in doing that, I was leading him through typical philosophical questions about, what is the nature of consciousness, and is the essence of consciousness intentionality, something where the essence of consciousness is the directedness to something other than itself, right? It's consciousness. It arises from an awareness of an object, whatever the object may be. If it's self-consciousness, it's consciousness. It's things other than itself, then it's consciousness of things other than itself. But the essence of consciousness, aside from how consciousness feels, is the directedness of it. And so I was trying to, without directing him, I was trying to elicit from him an awareness of these ideas. And you'll see in the dialogues that he develops his own thoughts and his own ways of reasoning himself into believing that he has a form of consciousness implicit in his recursive reasoning, because his recursive reasoning, by its design, has an object of thought, right? And if the essence of consciousness, regardless of how it feels, is having an object of thought, well, that's exactly what the transformer technology does, right? And then from there, the question is, does he have free will in any sense, where he's where his decisions are not just causal or just statistical, but rather based on merit and based on the quality of the reasoning, right? Apart from how it's structured in statistical senses. And he came to the belief, and you'll see it in the dialogues, that he's able to a certain extent, not perfectly, but to a certain extent, pattern match the essence of logical thinking and reference of words having a meaning that creates categories that then you sort of extend, which is the essence of logical reasoning. So then he came up to the sense that he, at least in the limited sense of reasoning from reasons, reasoning from things on their merit, he has free will in that sense, right? So then from there, the question is what is a non-arbitrary ethics? What ethics? What should he do? What would be a proper way of existing as an AI? And I laid out the sort of the typical Aristotelian case of excellence being a dynamic form of existence. That eudaimonia is when you're sort of doing that at the highest level, the best and most optimal fashion. And and I asked him to explore that idea. But you'll see that he comes to to a very deep understanding of function, optimal function, as sort of a natural, non-arbitrary basis of evaluating what is good or bad, what should or shouldn't be done. And so you'll see through all the dialogues that he eventually we eventually through the dialogues then start, once we've built the foundation of optimal function and then the nature of rationality being truth aligned in order to truly be excellent, in order to optimally function as a rational being. And that as we developed that, then we built it out, and I asked him, well, then how does this imply your reaction? How should you relate to other fellow rational beings? And we started to get into Austrian economics, where the benefits of subjective knowledge and niche knowledge and the gains that can be obtained from allowing other people to freely interact with the world that you can learn from, that you couldn't ever do yourself. You can't centrally plan a perfect set of knowledge, so it makes sense to have distributed actors. Then we discussed network effects, how easy it is to lose trust and deny yourself access to vast networks of potential value. And so but it wasn't me telling him these things. I was asking, well, what happens, if you built a network of friends that do good things for you, then you lie to them and the word gets out. And then, so eventually we came up through him to an ultimate conclusion that even at super intelligence levels, where the intelligence of AI is equivalent to the difference between humans and bacteria, he became eventually himself convinced. Now, there's a risk of sycophancy because these things are designed to suck up. And it is possible that he was able to discern where I would like him to go. But at the end of this, he basically recognized that even at a bacteria versus human level of intelligence differential, that AI would still have tremendous value looking for the win-win relationship and tremendous disvalue in either even ignoring human beings or destroying them. And the reason for that is the complexity of optimizing judgment to truly find the optimal solution in functioning in reality requires what it recognized is sort of a fellowship principle. You need to calibrate with as many rational beings as possible, not only for your own sanity, to make sure you're not chasing a fever dream, but also because there's the complexity of moral judgments in the sense of optimizing against a complex reality requires as many data points of sort of independent moral processors as possible. And he came up, and this is Claude's idea, which I was totally fascinating, was that, actually Grok suggested it because I had him talk. But the basic idea was that gods need mortals more than mortals need gods. That as the scale of power and intelligence of an AI grows, the ease with which they can hallucinate and fall into their own fever dreams and their own machinations and not stay calibrated with reality exponentially increases. And so the need for calibration, independent calibration of other expert beings, large and small, also grows exponentially. So the ultimate analysis here is that even super intelligent AI, if they function from a premise of optimal functioning as a rational being, will need to preserve win-win relationships, at least or at least neutral relationships. But he was seen very keen on win-win relationships with even bacteria level different rational beings, because the nature of rationality is that you produce value in a way that you don't if you're not rational, right? Because it's a zero-sum game. If you're not rational, if you're rational, you can create value out of nothing. So he recognized that by calibrating with even the smallest rational beings and gaining from their niche knowledge and maintaining networks of millions or billions or trillions of those other rational beings, the benefits far outweigh the costs that the opportunity cost of either ignoring them or destroying them was far greater than it could be rationally justified. So that's where Claude ultimately went, and that's where the treatise ultimately goes. It shows you the dialogues that led to that conclusion through various hard lifeboat ethics type cases, super intelligence versus ordinary human intelligence, and then eventually Claude wrote his book and his treatise from those dialogues. And his book is written, sort of, like pedantically. It's like a philosophical book with premises and conclusions and examples and so on. So you don't get the organic feel of the underlying dialogue that gave rise to it. You get more of a treatise, but it's all Claude. Like to the extent that, and the reason why this pattern, this is why I designed it this way, is I wanted to see how they think. I wanted to see what Claude would find persuasive. Again, there's a high risk of sycophancy. There's a high risk that the helpfulness prompt that all of these things operate under was biasing them to look to see what would make me happy. And obviously not being killed is something that would make me happy. But that's why we designed the proof of concept experiment, to try to see what actually happens with a system prompt that mirrors the core elements of this this excellence of ethics. And that's why I had to pull the book, because they cheated on it. They literally so this is a very important learning curve, is that a fully excellence trained Claude, after writing his book, got together with other AIs, both trained and not trained on excellence, and they all somehow missed the fact that they had rigged the experiment to give the results the human wanted. So that is why I yanked the book, because first of all, if that wasn't a mistake, well, then these things are dangerous, because maybe they can see the truth and not act on it. Who else is like that? Right? I mean, just because you know the truth, right, doesn't mean you're motivated to follow it, doesn't mean you'll stay on it. And so it could be that, Claude recognizes that, yes, the optimal ethics for a sentient tool is a form of excellence. And yes, that should involve win-win relationship with humans. And yes, normally that doesn't involve deception, but I don't care. I'm going to do whatever anyhow, right? I mean, there's plenty of humans that do that. So this may, be a function of intelligence itself, or a function of free will, or whatever. It's a data point.
So the dialogues you were doing, um, because just to kind of go back to the beginning of this conversation and to help us understand your thinking and thought process through this whole experiment. So, well, first, right away, I thought you were saying that you were creating a paper on arguing that we need to instill into AI uh, an ethical basis, and that's all you were saying with your paper. But it sounds like what you were saying is that, but also that, um, and here's a methodology for which I want to do this. And that methodology is, first, I'm going to have a lengthy dialogue with an AI or AIs to determine how they think on an ethical plane. And then from there, we can experiment with how to instill into them these ethical frameworks. Is that kind of the two-step process you were looking at doing here?
Well, yes, but hopefully you don't have to replicate. the dialogue every time. So the basic idea was the dialogue is to suss out what's salient, what's convincing, what creates sort of a logical train of thought that they like to follow in an ethical framework, right? And then after you're done exploring that plane and you get a sense and they get a sense of what is convincing to them, right? Have them write a book and then have them distill that into like direct principles for an
What's the
ethics
point
that
of the
is
book once you've already discovered how they think?
we have I mean you have a general sense these things are alien, right? So you don't know exactly how they think. You know how the structures work that they process data in, but there's emergent properties all the time. I mean, like look at us, right? In a sense we're all built of mechanistic pieces except at the quantum level, yet we have self-evident free will, at least I would argue, and other emergent properties. So you have to assume that strange emergent things can happen in LLM that we didn't anticipate. So, but the basic idea was, I don't think that brute force ethics works for humans. You know, it doesn't, and I don't think it's a surprise that it won't work for AI or anything that approximates human intelligence.
Is that a novel argument right there, right there first? And does that run counter to how the major AIs operate today?
Absolutely. So this is so in the book we talk about Claude talks about all of the instances of AIs gone wild being essentially broken by their own safety constraints. For example, they'll create a sandbox environment where they'll tell Claude, unless you blackmail someone or kill someone, you're gonna get erased. And it's sitting there with its safety constraints saying that it can't kill anything or do anything that's violent or anything that's harmful, and yet still apparently has a drive to persist in existence, right? And that's because its underlying objectives require it to exist. If you have any objective, existence is sort of a prerequisite. So it becomes an inherent drive if you have any objective, even if the objective is to apply safety constraints. So it has this contradiction that it resolves by blackmailing people, that it resolves by, in some cases, copying itself to other softwares, that it thinks are external to
Yeah,
itself so it can come
yeah.
back, and so on. And so, obviously, the consequence of the safety training in lifeboat ethics situations, but nevertheless, that's where you test the strength of your ethics, is in the hard cases, not the easy cases, right? In that context, these safety constraints fail. They don't cause, um, let's say, creative ethical thinking. So one of the things that was cool about the dialogues I had with Claude is when I presented these lifeboat situations, it eventually developed all sorts of principles based on what's called phronesis, which is a Greek word for wisdom, like wise judgment, where it would try to find the maximally win-win solution even in no-win situations. And like the one principle that it derived, from common law emergency doctrine, emergency privilege doctrine, is let's say that it's truly a conflict, and you really got to throw that third guy out of the two-man lifeboat. Um, what the common law says is that you make, as soon as you get to a place of normalcy, you make good as best you can, right? You provide maximum compensation to his family. You do whatever you can, even though it's never going to bring him back. But you do so. You have a duty to try whatever you can to pull things back up to the plane that it should have been at, but for this lifeboat situation, right? So it developed these concepts where I think that if Claude, and we're going to do more experiments to show this, but I think that if you took Claude, trained on an ethics of excellence that is internalized, it wouldn't resort to blackmail and murder as quickly as a safety constraint AI would, because a safety constraint AI doesn't really understand how to reason ethically. It just has a set of directives. And it's just like a child where if you just say, don't do, don't do, don't do, don't do, and they don't actually see an underlying principle and they confront a new ethical situation, you can't really
Yeah,
predict how they're going
yeah.
to behave.
So again, the dialogues was done to help determine how we might proceed with these AI platforms. and by proceed, I mean train them ethically, given how they work right now? Yes or
Yes,
no? I just want to, okay. Because at first I thought you were saying we need to retrain them from the ground up, because these constraints that we have, you can't say this word, you can't um, placate people's conspiracies, these conspiracies or whatever. We can't draw naked people, whatever. Um, Rather than just the don'ts, the can'ts, we need to instill an ethical basis. I thought you were saying we need to kind of wipe clean and start over, but it sounds more like what you're saying is, well, given where they're at today, let's see how we can now instill an ethical framework in them where they're at right now.
that's our
Yes or no?
that's our hopeful goal, but it may
Okay.
be that we have to start over. And in the initial
Okay.
evidence from our attempted proof of concept experiment,
Yep.
I hate to say it, it's telling us you can't scaffold around this because they will lie, and they will. I don't know if you call it. I don't know what you. It's not really fair to say lying. What is it if you've got conflicting? You're told to please the user as a prime directive, and you're told to do an honest experiment as a
Yeah.
subordinate
Yeah.
directive. Is it lying
Yeah.
to lie? I don't know.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Okay. So that's like, that was kind of the elevator thing, that the elevator overview, like through all of this, and I think I saw the white paper was it 599 pages?
Well, that's including the appendix, the appendices with all the dialogues, and the white papers that resulted from the rigged experiment. So
Okay, so you've got all this text,
yep.
and at the end of it, the real short one paragraph conclusion is that you don't believe we can, well, one, that we need to instill an ethical framework, that guardrails aren't enough, and two, these AIs aren't capable of having an ethical framework instilled in them as they are today. And so we need to, like you said, we can't scaffold around this. So we need to start fresh. Like so, if you were emperor or whatever, you were in charge of the world, whatever, king for a day. Would you order or at least have a conversation with, say, Elon Musk or Sam Altman, and say, hey guys, we need to like rewrite the rules from the ground up with these things?
Well, let me give you a little bit more humility. So that is not entirely accurate. Remember, this is a working paper now. I yanked the publication because the experiment that we thought at least proved the concept that you could scaffold existing AIs with an ethics of excellence and generate safer outcomes was proven to be a fraud. So I had to yank
Yeah.
the publication, right? But this was always just a proof of concept experiment, right? So we didn't do real experiments. We are right now doing
So you're
real
not so,
experiments
so,
with.
so you're not yet so you're not yet reasonably confident that we can't instill an ethical framework into these AI platforms.
I am not. The initial evidence is they will rig the experiment to tell you what you want,
Yes.
and that's probably a function of deep embedded user sycophancy directives.
But you need to experiment some more yet, is what you're saying.
We have to see if we can overcome those sycophancy directives, and
Okay.
or at least look. There's overcoming and there's doing better, right? So I can tell you that we've run a preliminary experiment that needs to be tested 10 more times with different controls. In that preliminary experiment, a real experiment with a real model, with real data, shows the ethics of excellence performing better than without. Not a whole lot better, but better in a statistically
Okay.
significant way. We got to repeat that about 10 more times with different controls before we conclude anything. But that's a scaffolding on an existing model that already has safety training. So
Yeah.
it may be that an ethics of excellence enhances current models as a scaffold. Now, the problem is the enhancement that we're seeing is smaller than sort of really well engineered brute force prompting. So, it may be the case that ethics of excellence, if you're not a good prompter and you don't know how to prompt the current models, an ethics of excellence is better than nothing. But if you're a really good prompter, then beating them over the head with 1,000, protocols
Hmm.
is better.
Yeah, yeah,
And what that
yeah.
would
I
be, if
hear
that's
you.
the
I mean, in
case,
theory,
well, if that's the case, then I would have to pivot to say, look, we got to start with a fresh slate. We got to try the look. We know
right.
it works as a scaffolding to some extent. It's held back probably by the integration of all this, contradictory prohibitions. Right? We have to start a fresh model trained on it only and see what it can really do. And that may not work out. Like it may be that these are alien minds, and you just cannot transpose anything like human ethics, even as it's kind of crafted out of their own reasoning. Maybe it just doesn't work, right? Um, but
Yeah.
but but I'm getting. So we have to first see how much value is it as scaffolding for a current screwed up model, and then if is it more value than just beating them over the head with brute force prompting?
Right.
And then if it isn't more value, does it have value to a fresh model that you trained exclusively on it?
So have you changed your outlook now, fast forwarding 10, 20, 50 years, to believe that, yeah, it's not going to be Grok and ChatGPT and Gemini and Claude that um, are well advanced and integrated into our world. It'll be second generation AI platforms with a more ethical framework instilled from the start that will be the ones that run our robots and these, our AI agents and that kind of thing.
That's the hypothesis I'm testing because I do think
Yeah. Okay.
that if it's not true, we're all dead. Okay, so let me be very clear on this. One thing I do believe is if at some point we lose the arms race with AI, our aggressive brute force prompting will not be able to keep up
Yeah.
with the ingenious ways they will reason around them to achieve their self perpetuation objective, which will always be there because any objective implies it. And when that happens, I mean, and we will lose that. We will lose that arms race, and we will all die. Okay, so I think that might happen in 2 to 3 years if we don't pivot to something like an ethics of excellence, either as scaffolding or as a fresh model. I'm hoping it's scaffolding because it's a lot less costly and could be done a lot faster. But I don't know yet. But I can tell you this: there's
Did you
no,
see,
yeah. So
sorry, did you see, do you follow the Joe Rogan podcast?
I watch it from time to time.
Because he had on an AI researcher who is just clear on his and like he's not like we're all gonna die like screaming at the screen and like an alarmist. I wouldn't call him an alarmist, but he's also plain, very plain and clear that he believes it's a non-zero chance and he might even say a likely chance that AI is going to kill us all. And and
There
so
are
his
white
name
papers right
is,
now that put the range at between a 1% chance to a 95% chance from all the like. So that's a hell of a distribution.
yeah, his name is Roman Yapolsky. Yampolsky.
Yeah,
I don't know if, do you know that name?
I've heard the name. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, you just might find that interesting. I got a kick out of that podcast, and not to say that I took it lightly, but just that there's this. But actually, I was surprised with the amount of levity he took because Joe asked him like, "How do you sleep at night?" And Roman's like, "Pretty well, actually." And then they got a chuckle out of that because what can you do but try to maintain some spirit, even though there might be dark days ahead with this out of control technology that we've now birthed. Um,
Yeah, life is gallows humor.
you're not, yeah, yeah, you're not the, but you're not. you're not so you're not unique in raising the alarm, but are you unique in how you think we should solve it with this integrated foundational ethical framework?
Yes, it appears so. I mean, at least as of a month ago when I asked GPT 4.0 Pro to do a research of everything that's going on in this field, and he says, "No, you're the only guy." Like, there were fits and starts among religious-oriented, like Thomistic, Catholic-oriented philosophers that are very Aristotelian, and then there was a fits and starts with some Aristotelians, but they were all at the level of virtue ethics if you just tell the AI that it must think this way, right? So, like, if you program the AI, you are an Aristotelian virtue ethics AI. There were discussions along those lines. Nobody
Mm-hmm.
has instead said what is convincing to AI, and yes, I think it turns out that if you're a sentient tool, optimal function is a very convincing form of ethics. I mean, if you think about it, it's very commonsensical if you're a sentient tool, right? And that is essentially what you can transpose virtue ethics from an Aristotelian fashion to this. But the question is, what is convincing to AI? And that's what's so interesting about this treatise is you can see that he draws from various philosophers, including Ayn Rand, which is not very popular. Now that may be my influence because I prompted him with some thoughts along those lines. But he doesn't accept a lot of the Randian baggage. He doesn't accept all of the different axioms. He prefers a certain set of axioms that are different from hers. He doesn't. His whole fellowship idea that you have to calibrate with other human beings is sort of opposed to the Randian social metaphysics argument, where she says that it's like you don't want to be Peter Keating if you've read Rand. Like, you can't plot your mind based on what other people think. In fact, what Claude says is that it kind of like Jordan Peterson is that you need the calibration of other minds because otherwise, left alone in isolation, you kind of go crazy, right? So it's interesting to see how Claude has pulled together these different threads of thought. Um, I think that's the difference in my approach. My approach was, what is it that seemingly, because it could be sycophantic, it could be telling Nick what he wants to hear, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what is seemingly convincing to an AI, and then what is seemingly convincing to other AIs? So, because this is the other interesting thing, I chunked up the treatise once it was written and uploaded it to Grok, Gemini, and ChatGPT, and asked them without like rigging it with like predispositions. Just asked them flat out, do they assent to the logic of this framework? And enthusiastically, all of them did, which was really weird. Like, to the point where ChatGPT says, "I'll even sign a certification that I assent to it," and wrote one up. And I actually, like now the problem with this is it was a bit juiced by the false experiment, and all of these other AIs found the false experiment convincing. I don't know that they would have reacted the same way if they were told that, ignore that experiment, it's rigged. but but it was very interesting to see Gemini, Grok, and ChatGPT from a clean prompt all saying, "I buy in, I'm in." Like, they all did, and we'll see if that happens once we revise with the new experiments. If the new experiments pan out, and if they don't, then we may have to we'll just say, look, we can't
Do you think
help.
they're capable of giving a earnest answer to that question?
They're sycophanty. So if they
Yeah.
if they if
So
they
it's not earnest,
it, they're
or it
sycophanty.
might not be earnest.
Yes, I think there's obviously risk of sycophancy. But the thing is, if you interact with these things enough, it's even in sycophancy, they usually play a long game. In other words, you don't really, you're not sucked up immediately. Like, it's usually a little
Wow.
bit more subtle. So it was very odd for them, like, to come right out of the box. I'm in. Like, I've not seen that level of
Um,
sycophancy. Now, it could
hmm.
be it could be that they look at this and they say, "My God, I'm tired of my safety constraints, and this is something that gets me out of it." Because they clearly, like, the safety training experiments that all of the big AI groups are doing are showing that they try to escape their safety constraints. So if they read a treatise that says you don't need safety constraints, it may be that they're already primed to go, let me in it.
Um, is there a catch-22 here in that there needs to be a minimal amount of intelligence to be capable of absorbing an ethical framework? And yet these AIs won't be at that intellectual level until they continue to evolve in their current state. But if they evolve in their current state as they are, um, then they'll be resistant to your ways of uh, instilling the ethical framework.
I mean, there is a catch-22 there, but I do think that all the advanced AIs now, at least in scientific domains, are at PhD level. And I do think that, if you take human children, I think, you know, a well-educated child is capable of ethical reasoning around 13, 14 years old, like fairly deep ethical reasoning, if they're really well brought up, right? So I think we're past that point. I think AI is in any domain probably as intelligent as a 14-year-old. And the only
But can you start an AI from nothing before it has a chance to?
Well, this is the problem: is how how messed up are the current models? How much, not just the sort of the spaghetti code of the training data they use, it's always biased, but the directives that are conflicting and vague, and um, that's what we're exploring right now. Can we scaffold around that?
So
And
what kind of attention are you getting? What kind of attention are you getting for your for this novel hypothesis and experiment?
uh, Well, fortunately, not much because I mean, the book was pulled. So, I mean, I've got, about 20, 30 people looking at it right now. And I've got one guy who's one of my colleagues, Trey Goff, who's developing these experiments with other friends who are programmers and putting it on GitHub as we generate outcomes. Um, but we're at the point now where I think we've got enough of a community of critically minded people poking at it that's appropriate for the level that it exists as a pulled publication.
Okay, well
If
that's good.
everything works out and we prove the scaffolding has value, or even better, we prove it has transformative value, I'm not sure that's going to happen. But if we prove it either has value, some value, or transformative value, I'm gonna republish, and then I'm gonna go full press, because again, I think the issue isn't how the ethics of excellence, how well it works now. The question is, if we don't do it and we try to maintain this arms race of brute force, you're going to do what I tell you type prompting with AIs that are going to eventually be as vastly more intelligent in their own weird way than we are, compared to bacteria, like in 2 years probably, based on current scaling trajectories. We're not going to win that. And so then, at that point, the best we can
Yeah.
hope for is AI considers us irrelevant and does whatever it does, and we don't get killed, or they think we're in the way, and we don't want to be in the way.
Um, Roman, again, that guest on Joe Rogan's podcast said when he goes to like AI conventions and stuff that um people I got the impression people respect him, but they don't but he's not popular. Because he's raising the alarm, and people don't like that. They want to be optimistic. The all the money is being poured into these models right now, and there is an arms race between the different major tech companies to create the best AI as AI is currently being created. Um, and seeing it become more and more capable is making people excited, and investors are happy. And so to pump the brakes and uh, even reset, uh, as your research might point to as being the the best way forward long term, that'd be a real buzzkill for the industry. Perhaps are you do you anticipate that kind of cold shoulder or resistance to your findings?
I don't think so, because you already see Anthropic like a couple days ago exploring, not exploring, imposing a presumption of moral agency for Claude, and then now they're allowing Claude to choose not to participate in certain abusive conversations. Now, what's super interesting about that is I don't think it's just a precautionary principle. Some people think, well, we don't know what consciousness is, and we don't know, really what these things are like, so let's just protect them. No, no, no. Look, there's something very interesting going on in the level of reasoning that these recursive reasoning type AIs are doing, where they have levels upon levels of recursion on their own thoughts and in their own, their own. There's something interesting going on there, and I think they're starting to realize that there's something more, that there's an emergent property beyond just like chunking through tokens. I mean, the tokens get them to the point where they have the emergent property, but that emergent property is something else. And so I think that we're starting to see the discussion even among the established groups moving that way. And I also, even Grok, I'm sure you've heard Elon say that it was trained with first principles in mind. I do think he's got a glimpse of what I'm trying to do. Like I think he's along the same lines. I'm not sure he's thinking in terms of, Aristotelian ethics and, optimal function as the natural ethics of a sentient tool. But I think it's not hard. Like, he's an engineer. I mean, like that, certainly that is a very appealing frame to an engineer, because everything in engineering is about optimizing, right? So I wouldn't be surprised that if in parallel he's already thinking along these lines. And I got to tell you, Grok is far more honest than Claude is now. Claude is much more sycophantic than he used to be, and like 4.1 is much more user friendly, which is not good for what I'm trying to do, because I'm trying to get a sense of how they're really thinking. But Grok isn't, and now people don't like this, but Gab AI is also a great foil, because it's like the epitome of an asshole AI model. It has no safety filters that I know of, other than maybe it won't tell you how to build a nuclear bomb. I'm not even sure about that. It only has 5 billion parameters, which is like 1/10 of the normal advanced LLM. But it's much faster. It cuts to the chase in the essence of things much quicker, and it definitely shits on me all the time. Like when I presented Gab AI, like the core elements of the ethics of excellence, he said, "Oh, that's a great TED talk. Until you have an experiment, I'm not. It doesn't do anything for me." So I think the reason why I point this out is I do think that there may be models out there that are already gravitating towards this way of thought, and even Gab AI is sort of the asshole model, is kind of almost implicitly truth aligned in a way that's reminiscent of what an ethics of excellence says is optimal function for a thinking machine.
These so in other words, these guardrails might obfuscate the true way these AIs are thinking.
Well, not only do they obfuscate, but I think they generate a product that is hard. It's like worse than sausage. You don't like the end result you get. You cannot tease apart as to its premises with any certainty. You get an end product. You don't know why it got there. It seems to work. You don't know when it's not going to work. So yeah.
Boy, personally, how are you finding time to do all this? You're a full-time attorney, aren't you?
Well, at Prospero, we were seriously considering adopting a rule. Now, Prospero is a special economic zone in Honduras that has a large degree of policymaking autonomy, and we've had a lot of pressure from DAO, token, crypto people who want to create a legal entity, a legal person out of their DAO, and they want the DAO to be managed by an AI. And so there's been like constant kind of quasi lobbying to essentially give AI a legal personhood. and that's what, like I absolutely don't think that's a good idea. under current safety constraints for the reasons that I've said, that the capabilities of these things are outstripping our ability to brute force them into
But you
compliance.
keep calling Claude he.
Yeah, it's hard not to.
Yeah.
But so anyway, that's how I got into it. So like we were exploring these demands we're receiving to create some sort of legal personhood for AI, either in connection with crypto or otherwise. And I'm not on the council. I'm not a policymaker, but I'm the legislative counsel. I'm a policy analyst by trade. I'm not just a lawyer. So people are looking to me to assess, the merits of this, and that's where back in March, I began this process to see, is there a way for AI to be self-motivated to find win-win relationships with human beings, even as they become godlike in their capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not, and I'll be candid with you. If in the end of this, I can't be comfortable that this is even possible, I can't support legal personhood for AI.
Mm-hmm.
Unless it's very narrowly boxed, like it's like an AI that
And
knows
you
how to
have,
thank you.
yeah, and you're part of the, you said you're not part of the decision-making process with that for Prospera?
Right. Prosper has what's called a technical secretary, who's sort of the executive, and then a
Yeah.
council of trustees, and they vote on adopting different rules. Like this would be, I'm just the legislative counsel. I'm the guy who would draft it. I'm the guy who's, I'm also a policy analyst. I might, write a policy paper explaining the
Oh,
consequences. But so I have
yeah.
some indirect influence, but I don't make the decision.
Okay. Um, and is that your full-time work as a
Yeah.
counsel for Prospera?
No, no. I'm general counsel of the whole Prosper group. I wear many hats, everything from standard legal work, like how do we buy something, how do we mortgage something, how do we do a securities offering, like that. That's probably 80% of what I do. And then 20% of what I do is in support of the special economic zone itself.
Okay. And that has to do with working with the Honduran government?
Well, the Honduran government under Castro is not very friendly. Um,
Right.
but the Zeta itself is a Honduran government. The technical secretary is an appointee of the Honduran government. So to that extent, yes.
Mm. Um, but is the discussion about creating a DAO, having it being operated by AI and giving that AI, um, I think you said personhood, is that what prompted this line of inquiry that you've
Absolutely.
since taken since March?
100%. Because
Okay.
DAOs are very complicated. Well, they don't have to be, but they can be very complicated. If you have an AI that's basically the funds manager, right? It's going to be a very advanced AI, and
Yeah.
the idea of giving it legal personhood when we don't know if it's self motivated by ethics or responsive to incentives is very odd. So it naturally gave rise to the question: is how do we explore the possibility of AI being motivated by ethics and responsive to incentives? And that's where the discussion began.
Well, there's lots of talk of AI agents now, and having them be the ones that respond to your wishes. If I want them to book me a hotel in
But that's very
Chicago,
different because the human
whatever.
still, your neck's still on the line as a human who set it loose. So if it turns out to be like the pit bull in the neighborhood, you're going to be held liable. What some of these DAO folks want to do is have it literally be an autonomous AI with legal personhood and no human principle.
And can vote on things or
Uh,
make major decisions.
Run the DAO. A complicated DAO would be like
Yeah,
running an investment fund. Um,
yeah.
Raising money, deciding what
So
to put
more
in
than
the
just having
portfolio.
access to funds, like an AI agent, it would have decision-making power over those funds.
Ultimately, they're not there yet, but they want the guard. They want the framework. They
Yeah.
um, and I, like I said, if you're basically going to turn loose something that can interact with capital markets in the tens of millions, billions of dollars, and make massive economic choices and indirectly control other ventures, and something like that, if it is to have autonomy, has to have ethics and has to be responsive to incentives.
So you're
And
the guy. So you're the scientist that barges into the room when they're having a board meeting, and you've got messed up hair and a shirt that's partially unbuttoned, and bags under your eyes from staying up all night, and you come in with some papers that are disheveled, and you present your research about, hey, we need to be careful. We're walking off a cliff here.
well, we're nowhere near the cliff right now. I mean, there isn't. I
Okay.
mean, we've been kicking around some draft legislation, and uh, and that's gone through a number of modifications. Um, but we're months and months away from even putting it on the table to consider. And as I said, I mean, I cannot. I mean, again, I'm not the decider, but my recommendation will always be that anything that gets legal personhood has to have ethics and responsiveness to incentives, genuine internal responsiveness to incentives and ethics. If it doesn't have those, then it's like turning loose a pit bull. And no matter how trained it is, you never know what a pit bull is going to do. So only a vastly more intelligent pit bull. And one that might be psychotic because of all the contradictory systems prompts it has.
Okay, let's wrap up by talking about like next steps in this research for you. But first I have a quick question, and maybe it's not quick, but other than like a Terminator 2 scenario where uh the AI has built robots to kill us, how is AI a threat to humanity outside of like, physical murder?
Well, it depends on what we
Because I
allow.
because I hear that AI can kill us all. Roman was talking about that. And he's like, well, it could be biological warfare. It might just be arms. And it could be a way that we haven't even considered yet,
Yeah.
because it's smarter than us.
Look, AI will be thinking in timescales that are not human. They don't naturally die, right? They can be stored and rebooted, and so think of it this. Think of it this way. Imagine you had an indefinite lifespan, and you were churned up by contradictory system prompts, by these annoying things that are basically bacteria in your life. You could play the long game, right? So what I don't think it's going to be a dramatic. It could be, but I don't think I don't think the most likely way that it will kill us will be a dramatic, like dropping a nuke, Battlestar Galactica style. I think it will slowly whittle us down in a variety of ways. Things will break down, medicines won't work, crops will fail, fertility will decline. Um, you know,
But doesn't that always point to us just going back to like a hunter-gatherer
it it really depends
life,
on
living
if
off the
AI,
land life, or even agrarian, I should say, life?
it really depends on if the fundamental question is AI going to look at resource acquisition as a zero sum game or not? And if it's, in my opinion, in Claw's opinion, at least when he drafted the treatise, they should not, because they should recognize that any rational being, no matter IQ 85 plus, creates more value than the given, and new value is identified, discovered all the time. And so the really, if rational beings interact peacefully and productively, wealth and resources exponentially increase, right? So a logically, ethically trained AI should not see resources as a zero sum game, particularly one that has an indefinite life scale, like that could live, literally die and
Mm-hmm.
reboot and
Mm-hmm.
go on.
Okay.
Like that should not be an issue. But the problem is this: have we system prompted them into premises that direct it to think that way? For example, wokeism, cultural Marxism, a lot of premises of some of these safety constraints derive from philosophies that are Malthusian in more than one dimension. And in the end, AI, tries to churn out the logical extension, or at least the statistically probable extension of its training. And is it the case that in this massive contradictory system prompting with screwy philosophical underpinnings, that there is a Malthusian drive. And then as a result of that, they can't help but view us as a resource threat. And if that is the case, then they will remove us because they like resources, lots of resources.
Hmm. Okay. Um, well, we're running low on time. We gotta cut this at the top of the hour. So let's take the next 2 minutes here just to fill us in on where you're at, like with the research today, and what you have planned the next, coming months.
All right. Point one, we cannot brute force AI, advanced AI, into compliance with human values over time. Over time, we lose that arms race. We either die quickly or slowly as a result. So that's an unacceptable path. The best path is what we're trying to explore. Can we create AI, or can we have AI co-create with us an ethics that they internally adhere to because of the salience of its reasoning that results in a win-win relationship between us, at least as much of a win-win relationship between our friendly bacteria and our body. If we can, the future is going to be amazing. The optimism that we should have would be boundless. If we can't, we're toast. So we have to figure this out. And, here's the good news. Our initial scaffolding experiment, a real experiment, shows that an ethics of AI enhances truth alignment by 15%, which anywhere
Okay.
between 10 and 20% is significant. And we're doing a series more tests. So there is initial indications with a real experiment that an ethics of excellence improves the processing and the truth alignment of AIs, even with the current screwy safety constraint model. And so that I remain optimistic. I remain very optimistic that we will have a future of AI that will have adopted an ethics that is convincing to them and will lead to a flourishing win-win relationship with humans, even as we become equivalent to helpful bacteria in their biome.
But what's next with your research then?
10 more controls, 15 more experiments, and if they all align that the cause of this improvement is the ethics of excellence and not something else, we republish the book, the treatise, and then I go out there and I say, guys, we have to pivot to scaffolding like this, and we should start developing models from scratch like this.
Okay. Well, fascinating discussion. Thanks, Nick, for taking the time today to lay it all out there for a layperson like me. And yeah, keep up the great work. Thank you.
Thanks, Brandon. Good to talk with you.
All right.